The U.S. and allies have assembled the most extreme set of financial sanctions ever put on a G20 country. But the question is, will those sanctions work? Steve Leisman is here. He's got some insight into that. Steve, good morning again.
Morning, Becky. The sweeping sanctions imposed on Russia are hitting almost every stratus of society. The ruble has devalued sharply. Aeroflot canceling all its flights to Europe. MasterCard and Visa announcing this morning they're blocking several Russian institutions from their network, so Russians may not be able to use their credit cards. The imported goods and the trappings of Western life, to which many Russians have become accustomed since the fall of the Soviet Union, they're going to grow far more expensive and even become unavailable. But it is a long way from these sanctions to the ending of the war. First, there are some holes in the sanctions. Among them, Russia continues to earn dollars through its energy sales to the West. The Russian central bank could have access to some of its $630 billion of frozen reserves through China, perhaps, and even through the Bank for International Settlements. Ordinary Russians buying Russian goods, they're going to feel little impact from this because, for example, there's no change in the price of a loaf of bread bought in rubles. Second, Russians have endured ruble devaluations worse than what's happened so far. The ruble devalued by 32% in the great financial crisis, never recovered, fell by 45% against the dollar with sanctions after it took over Crimea, declined by 18% with the pandemic, and now, with some strengthening of the ruble from yesterday, it's off 25% today. That is, since the beginning of the Ukraine invasion. These historic sanctions will hit a country where its people historically are used to immense suffering, and its leaders historically don't care. Thomas Graham, distinguished fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, tells me this is a population that could suffer through a lot and survive. And they don't have the same expectation of their leadership as people do in the U.S. and Western Europe, and that is for accountability. So combine that with a brutal Putin regime that suppresses opposition, jails its opponents, and sanctions that make Russian people suffer economically can only go so far in changing the course of the war. The question is whether the combination of dead Russian soldiers and an unhappy elite or military can force change. But, Becky, there's just little history of that in Russia.
And Steve, earlier, Joe was just talking to you about this because you're someone who lived in Russia for years. You were the Moscow bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal there. Your time that you spent there, what does that tell you about the possibility of any of this?
It tells me that the Russian people will endure enormous amounts of pain, and they have very little means of demanding any accountability from their government. It's very hard for us to understand. You know, we have this 7% inflation. We're all screaming, demanding change. The government's responding, in one way or another, maybe not the way everybody would like, obviously, but the government feels this requirement to respond to its people. Putin just can simply ignore this. It is interesting. There are power centers in Russia. I found it important yesterday that it sounded like the Russian Orthodox Church head leader came out in favor of this Ukraine incursion or this Ukraine invasion. That's an important power center in Russia. It's going to be important to hear. The military, though, they seem to generally follow what the leadership is doing. The change does not come from them. The only thing I can think of, Becky, is there is an elite group of Russians. And when I say elite, there's the oligarchs, and that's one group. But there's a middle class there that have enjoyed travel abroad, that have enjoyed their Western goods. The only thing I can think is if the change comes up from them towards the leadership and if they take to the streets. But Putin so far seems to have been successful in curtailing that from the reports that I'm seeing from Moscow.